Dusk Diver, Dusk Diver, Dusk Diver. If there was one thing clear from my video talking about this week's physical releases, it's that you guys are very interested in Dusk Diver. While we are stretched to the absolute limit in terms of projects, your interest means that we could not pass on checking this one out. And my word, am I glad we did. Here's our review of Dusk Diver on the Switch. Dusk Diver is set in modern-day Taipei, Taiwan, taking place entirely in Ximending, an actual real-life location. You are Yang Yumo, a schoolgirl who, with her friend, stumbles into a dimensional fissure, sending her into Yoshanding, pretty much the antithesis of her own reality. It's filled with monsters, but somehow she absorbs the power of a local guardian to thwart off the threat. After showing off her kung fu moves that she learned from TV shows, she's hired by the local head honcho guardian, whose grounds are having a worrying amount of disturbing activity. With her newfound powers, it's her job to jump in when a rift appears and beat up the bad guys. The story is fun and the characters are very likable. There's a lot of talking between Yumo and her guardians and her friends and so on, and even though the main plot is slightly generic and it jumps all over the place, the interactions between characters is what make this a very enjoyable story. While being described as an action RPG, I guess it's just a fancier way of saying a 3D brawler, because that's exactly what it is. It's a combo brawler. Think of a Dynasty Warriors games just without the swords, although I will give it credit for having more depth than that. As explained in the story, the gameplay is divided by two dimensions, Ximending and Yoshanding. The combat goodness takes place in the alternate dimension of Yoshanding, where Yumo has her powers come to life by absorbing the powers of the handful of guardians she'll meet during the time protecting the neighborhood. The basic controls are a light attack, a heavy attack, and then also a guardian attack to round things off. To put it bluntly, you mash Y a few times, smash it with X, and then finish off with A. Depending on how many inputs for each, your guardian and your heavy attack will do different things, mostly just in presentation though. Now the guardians can only be used sparingly. You have a set amount of usage thanks to a meter below your health, but this is constantly replenished by wailing on enemies with your personal attacks. You can switch between guardians with the D-pad, and if you attack with one guardian, you can flick to another one and unleash one of their attacks too, which makes battles look awesome as your different colored allies fly in and out. You can get a real nice flow going, and the longer you combo enemies, the greater rewards for you. The Guardians have their nice own specialties, like Leo is a powerhouse up close, while the big booby lady is great for ignoring powerful enemies' armor. There's a few other stuff like going Super Saiyan and unleashing a Guardian's unique special attack, so there's lots going on, and I feel it does decently by the genre, a genre that is eternally repetitive. And yes, Dusk Diver is repetitive, mostly mindless, button spammy, and so on. It very much comes with the territory. But you know what, despite an inherent budgetness about it, I loved it. I mean, I like Dynasty Warriors, but I really like this, even though I will fully admit it will probably not keep many of yours attention like it did me, because it's very much like a B-tier middle budget release. I've mentioned this before, but this is the kind of game that you'd find all the time on the PlayStation 2, when not every game had to be a blockbuster and the underdogs could stand toe-to-toe with the big boys. It's the kind of game that you'd find in the bargain bin, and when you get home you'd think, actually this is a bit of a hidden gem. You'd have a good time, and it does feel like a fully fleshed out game despite its limited scope. Because while the game will probably take you a dozen hours or more, especially if you want to enjoy everything it has to offer, which is a surprising amount, outside of the main quest there are a decent amount of things to do. There are plenty of side quests to be getting on with to help the people of Ximending, some more simple than others, but definitely worth doing. You can also do optional missions with specific guardians to increase their move pool, but these can only be attempted once you've reached a certain relationship level with the guardian. And this can come by naturally by using them in battle, or by buying snacks that they like, which, by the way, can give you a nice little bonus before diving into the alternative dimension. Building your relationships with the guardians and increasing their skills can give a small scene of character development too, which I think are worth seeing. It's kind of like a very limited Persona game in that regard. In fact, it has many essences of Persona, right from the style, the setting, the basic life sim things, and the relationship building. I guess it all reminds me more of Tokyo Mirage Sessions in that regard, which was basically half a step towards being a Persona game. Yeah, that is high praise considering, like I said, it is limited, and it does feel like an off-brand copy that's rightly half the price. But that doesn't mean I dismissed it, because I actually quite love Dusk Diver for it. Things like using the gacha machine to get concept art, new outfits for characters, and items take me back to think about how awesome it was in Shenmue. but again, a budget limited version. There's loads of things to unlock and check out. And despite every facet of the game being somewhat unpolished or overly basic, it all comes together to create something that captured my heart. I'll freely admit it's rough and repetitive, but this is the kind of game I'd give an A for effort and a C for execution. And some people will adore that, while others will think it's just not up to scratch. I'm definitely in the former, but I do understand the majority will be in the latter. Dusk Diver is not a great game by any means, and I'm probably going to be in the minority when I say it really resonated with me, and I really admire what it tried to do. Before we get into other sections of this review, don't forget to subscribe if you're new to the channel for more awesome reviews like this, weekly bargains videos, and all the physical releases coming out for the Switch. Plus, you can potentially win a Nintendo Switch Lite and Link's Awakening once we hit 50,000 subscribers. The visuals are pretty good for what I think the budget was for this game. There's lots of bright color and style here, at least in our dimension. When I saw the trailer and played the game for myself, I mean, it's Tokyo Mirage Sessions through and through, which in itself is a mutation of the Persona games. And yeah, I know they say it's Shin Megami Tensei, but come on, they ain't fooling anyone. The alternate dimension is slightly more drab, kind of reminds me of the other dimension in Astral Chain, which got visually tiresome after a while, but it does liven up, and the rain effects version does look quite awesome. Sadly, the performance wasn't great during my time with Dusk Diver. Not in the main gameplay part, that was mostly fine, as far as I can tell, but during the time exploring the hub world, I think the amount of people on screen is just too much for the Switch, at least with the coding here. Since it's not a massive part of the gameplay, it didn't really bother me that much, but I was surprised at how noticeable it was, especially in handheld mode. That was really poor. I've been told that improvements will be made in a day one patch, but how much? Well, we'll have to see. And including that, there are also more updates that are promised, like another proofread of the English translation, which during the build I played was very, very sloppy, almost unprofessional. But hopefully that's sorted before you guys even get your hands on it. The music is pretty decent, some awesome fight music going on, some nice daily life stuff like in the convenience store and that, although the main theme was difficult for me to like, mainly because the opening few notes sound exactly like the song, "Why Are We Waiting?" And I literally cannot enjoy the song because of that. And I'm really sorry if I just ruined that song for you too. There is voice acting in Dusk Diver, almost entirely so. There's both Japanese and Mandarin voice acting, and I went with Mandarin because I can actually understand most of it. So that was a nice bonus for me personally. I'm not used to games having Mandarin voice, so that was a lovely treat for me. On the eShop, Dusk Diver is £35 in the UK, $40 in the US, and €40 in Europe. It's not quite AAA, maybe AA is more appropriate. For more than a dozen hours or so, you're looking at some decent value when considering the effort gone into creating the game. Not massive value for money, but I wouldn't complain if I bought it myself. Again, it harkens back to an older time when these kind of games were all over the place with gems to be found for a lower price. It's worth noting that Dusk Diver is receiving a physical release. It's out this week in Europe, while North America will have to wait until next month to get their hands on it, if my contacts at PQ told me correctly. There's a day one edition of the release which includes some nice goodies to get your hands on with an art book, badges, and some costume DLC. If you want to order and support the show at the same time, then I'll pop some links below as to where you can find them in the description and pinned comment. I'm sure a few Americans may be impatient and want to import this one a little bit earlier. Just for the record, Dusk Diver takes up just over 3 GB of digital space on your Nintendo Switch. Overall, I know that Dusk Diver is a repetitive brawler whose individual gameplay pieces and mechanics that if critiqued separately would probably be regarded as decent or perhaps somewhat mediocre. However, Dusk Diver is greater than its sum of its parts, and even though I'll freely admit I may come from a minority opinion, I really, really like it, way more than I should. Probably more than most of you. It's slightly undercooked in most of its aspects, but it has its charm, it has the effort, and despite the mindless action, I enjoyed my time with Dusk Diver entirely. It reminds me of the PlayStation 2 era so much, where a smaller team could go toe-to-toe with the big boys and pull something enjoyable out of the bag. Plus, if you'd like a brawler with a budget Persona drape, this may be a nice game for you. But I do need to come back down to reality for the final score, and even though my own little dream world, it's much higher than this, in reality, it's probably a 7.5 out of 10. Although this is probably going to be in my top 5 games of this year. If it was just myself, my personal taste, I'd give it a 9. Anyways, head over to watch Monday's episode of All the Physicals, telling you all the physical games coming this week, plus my review of Destiny Connect, which released in America earlier this week, and tomorrow for Europe. And check out James's Bargains video, telling you the best way to spend your money in the cheapest way possible. We'll see you guys over there. Take care.